school, and that is so good because that gives them that sense of community. And like you were talking about, Jim, in China, that's what was needed. It's that sense of belonging. It's that sense of being a part of something bigger. And so we've been able to create that because of the ability to work long-term with families.
All right, Kim, and thank you very much for joining us. Kim Button.
She's awesome. She is amazing. Yeah.
No, she sounds amazing. So collectivism again. We won't get entirely to this discussion, or at least it won't be as long as we wanted to. We'll do a part of it tomorrow. The Simon Upton-led OECD report on our environment out today reckons that if New Zealand's GDP took into account environmental costs, the economy would actually be shrinking. Aside from carbon emissions, which is a big issue, our water quality is under focus, and we know this. We've had these discussions. And London-based climate and economic consultants Vivid Economics also has a report out. Oh, are you destroying the studio there?
Yes, could you hear that? I'm so sorry. I've got myself in a tangle. Okay, I'll be quiet.
That's right. No, it's all right. Vivid Economics has a report out from London. And it talks about the same issues. The difficulty of New Zealand achieving carbon neutrality while there is so much methane coming out of our cars, and of course pollution of the water. And what we face, in the opinion of the writers of these reports, is a move away from cars. And we will examine the feasibility of that tomorrow. But these reports outline the dilemma. If we abandon intensive dairying and meat production as the other aspect, people will still want meat and milk, and other countries less scrupulous than ours may cheerfully supply it. Can you see a way out?
Well, I do think that we need to... it starts with a conversation that says this is real. So rather than just pretending that we can have an intensive dairy environment and that it doesn't have a big impact, is not the right place to be. Then I believe, actually, that New Zealanders are incredibly clever and adaptable. And why are we not finding a way to make this as environmentally efficient as we possibly can? So I don't think it's an argument. I've never particularly liked the argument that says, well, somebody else unscrupulous will do it somewhere else. I find that kind of a defeatist way of looking at it. But I do think that there's got to be something that says, okay, this is real. Let's not pretend it doesn't exist. Let's not argue amongst ourselves that, in fact, there isn't an issue. There is. And having recognised that, what do we need to be doing in terms of the resources required in research and development to actually make this something which is much less harmful?
All right, so you're returning to the leadership theme that you both raised earlier. Ali, quick comments?
Yeah, well, just quickly, we've got a Pledge Me thing happening down here at the moment for a train to get cars off our roads and try and be more sort of environmentally sensible over those, as far as traffic goes, because we seem to be just putting more bus lanes on the road and building more roads. And look, I love my car. I absolutely love it. I drive around in it on my own, appallingly, every day, many, many kilometres. But there are lots of people now living in the north of Canterbury who would... North Christchurch rather, and they would come into Christchurch through the key activity centres like Papanui and places like that into the centre of town on a train, and the tracks are there. And the chap who's put this together, it's just awesome. He wants to use biodiesel, so, wish him all the best.
Thank you. Ali Jones, Michael Moynihan. Very nice to have both of you on the panel. Come back soon, and thanks everybody. Checkpoint with John Campbell now.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight it's electorate do or die for Labour MPs in the Māori seats. We investigate these extraordinary contests. An American heart surgeon who caused that fatal three-car crash near Nelson appears in court, horrified by the carnage he caused. We are live at Nikki Haga's book launch. A New Zealand mother prescribed controversial pregnancy drug Primitus during one of her pregnancies, talks about how casually she was given it. Former Prime Minister John Keon raising the super age, the impact of the Christchurch quakes and bowing out of Parliament. And gender-free school uniforms, a lovely story out of Dunedin. Also tonight, science prizes and the remarkable work behind them and more.
RNZ News at 5. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. Child, Youth and Family has done a U-turn after telling the family court for years that a man had been convicted and jailed for sex abuse when he hasn't. The man told the Privacy Commissioner his son, family and wider community believed the wrong information, and he's been assaulted and his house attacked as a result. Phil Pennington reports.
Social workers first got it wrong in 2001, and despite being told 3 times they were wrong, they did not correct their reports to the family court till last year. The Ministry for Social Development has since apologised. It told the Privacy Commissioner the man got a 12-month suspended sentence for assaulting children in his care over them engaging in sexualised behaviour, and this event was misinterpreted by social workers. The Privacy Commissioner says the Ministry interfered with the man's privacy and failed to check out the information. It has sent the case to the Director of Human Rights Proceedings. This is Phil Pennington.
In a separate case, the lawyer representing a Wellington man who was wrongly accused of being violent by Child, Youth and Family says the agency has systemic failings. The government is demanding a full review of Child, Youth and Family's handling of the case, which caused delays in the man gaining care of his 3-year-old daughter. The father is now suing the agency for exemplary damages. His lawyer, Chris Nichols, says the agency is quick to jump to conclusions without checking its facts.
In this particular case that I was involved in, the agency formed a very clear view, it seemed, very early on in the case, based on incorrect and incomplete information.
Chris Nichols says it's important changes are made at Child, Youth and Family to improve the accuracy of its information. The OECD wants a price on water in New Zealand to make sure it's used more efficiently. In a once-in-a-decade report, the OECD says New Zealand's environment will be compromised if the economy continues to grow the way it is. It's pushing for a form of charging for water. The organisation's Environment Director, Simon Upton, says its stance on water pricing is in common with its approach on most scarce resources. He says the OECD gave this advice 10 years ago in its last environmental review, and it's giving it again.
It's not rocket science, and it's applied in many parts of the world, that if you want to be able to move water to be used by the most efficient user and the highest value user, then you need a more flexible system than one which simply hands out water for 35 years and the pattern is frozen.
The OECD's Environment Director, Simon Upton. The mother of a 15-month-old boy beaten to death says she initially covered for her partner as she didn't want him to get arrested for his murder. Troy Taylor's on trial in the High Court in Christchurch for assaulting and murdering Ihaka Stokes at their home in 2015. The boy's 21-year-old mother, Michaela Stokes, was the first person to give evidence in the trial, which started yesterday. She said she initially told the police she would sometimes sleepwalk as an explanation for the 59 injuries her son suffered as a way to throw them off the trail. She said she loved her partner and didn't want to see him go down for her son's murder. She denied injuring her son and said she would never harm her own children.
All I know is a police investigation.
The National MP, Todd Barclay, has refused to be interviewed by police who were investigating claims he had secretly recorded staff in his electorate office. Documents show a former long-serving staff member who had worked in the electorate for 17 years told police she'd been informed Mr Barclay had recordings of private and personal calls from her office. Mr Barclay had initially said he would cooperate with police, but he now says he's declined to be interviewed, as is his right. The Prime Minister, Bill English, who held the Clutha Southland seat before Mr Barclay, says he knew the complainant well, but the matter has been dealt with.
All I know is a police investigation has come to an end. They've released some information about it, so the matter's closed.
Bill English. A car and a bus have crashed on the road to Milford Sound this afternoon and several passengers have been treated for minor injuries. The police say both vehicles burst into flames after the collision and the road from Te Anau to Milford has been closed as a result. It's 5:05. To sport, and the Breakers General Manager Dylan Boucher says dumped basketballer Corey Webster needs to decide if he wants a future in the sport. The Breakers have decided against taking up an option for a further year on Webster's Australian NBL contract. The 28-year-old Tall Black is facing assault charges and was suspended from the sport for a year in 2011 after failing a drugs test. Boucher says Webster now has some choices to make.
Corey would agree, and he would probably be the first one to say that, that he thinks he probably needs to have some time away from the club and really look at what his basketball career means to him.
Breakers General Manager Dylan Boucher. The Hurricanes have a bye this week in the Super Rugby competition, but Beauden Barrett is still set to spend plenty of time with his boots on. Barrett managed only one conversion against the Highlanders last weekend, with his brother Geordie taking over the kicking. However, the Hurricanes coach Chris Boyd says that doesn't mean Beauden is about to relinquish the kicking duties.
He'll be personally disappointed with his kicking effort, and so he'll go back during the week and go over his process, and another day he'll come out and he'll win us a game out here with his kicking.
Chris Boyd. The Leicester striker Jamie Vardy says he's received death threats since Claudio Ranieri was sacked as manager of the defending English Premier League football champions, blaming false accusations he influenced the club's decision. And the former Wimbledon champion Petra Kvitova has regained the use of her racket hand, but there's still no firm date for her return to court after a knife attack at her home in December. That's the news.
Team Trump under FBI investigation.
The potential of links between American citizens, members of Donald Trump's campaign, and a foreign government. That's the part that's shocking.
The national government's water woes.
Now you've got Bill English saying, yeah, we're going to give it to this committee to have a look at, but nothing will happen until after the election. Well, it's just another example of this government kicking the can down the road.
And pregnancy test drug Primados casts a shadow in New Zealand.
I would think it would be practically impossible to do an accurate analysis of what happened.
Hard questions, no easy answers. Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson, Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, Northern Mystics CEO Julie Patterson on creating New Zealand's first national organisation to advocate for women in sport. And after 10, polio survivor and advocate Gordon Jackman on how to eradicate the disease by 2020 and how to support survivors. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Waikato, cloudy periods. Waitomo, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo, fine but cloudy periods tomorrow. Taranaki to Wellington, including Taumarunui and Taihape, mainly fine but low cloud and occasional drizzle developing tonight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine but cloud increasing tomorrow evening with some drizzle in Hawke's Bay. Wairarapa, fine but becoming cloudy overnight, cloudy and some patchy drizzle tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, excluding the Kaikoura Coast, mainly fine but isolated showers about the ranges. Kaikoura Coast and Canterbury, cloudy with patchy drizzle. Otago and Southland, often cloudy with a few showers tomorrow. Buller and Westland, rain or drizzle spreading north, clearing in Westland this evening and elsewhere tomorrow morning. Fiordland, cloudy periods with 1 or 2 showers in the south, and the Chatham Islands, a few showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow. It's just gone 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Coming up before 6 o'clock, more on Primados, the pregnancy testing drug that stands accused of causing birth abnormalities and even miscarriages and stillbirths. We talked to a New Zealand mother who took it. John Key talks to Jane Patterson on the eve of his farewell speech to Parliament, and yes, he is taking the 50 grand annual annuity paid to former Prime Ministers. Nikki Hager's new book is out in the next 15 or 20 minutes. We will cross to Unity Books in Wellington live, and prize-winning science that changes the way we see ourselves and the world. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. First up tonight, the Māori electorates and the battle for them. With the Māori Party receiving the support of the Māori King, and with Hone Harawira getting a clear run at Labour in the north, these are crucial battlegrounds in the upcoming election. The latest poll suggests National will need Māori Party support to get back. Well, today Labour has announced its electorate do or die for its MPs in the seats. None of their Māori electorate MPs or candidates will have list places. Labour currently holds 6 of the 7 Māori seats. Inside the fascinating contest for these seats, here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
The Labour MPs contesting the Māori seats have been given a waiver by the party to stand as electorate-only candidates at their request. The Labour Party leader, Andrew Little, describes the move as a direct challenge to the Māori Party, which he says has failed Māori since being shackled to National for 9 years. He says Labour will offer Māori the strongest, most organised political voice of any party.
I would be very proud if I have the privilege of forming a government after the 23rd of September to be leading a caucus that has that voice, with our Māori MPs with a permanent seat at the table and integral to our party, its policy making and its decision making.
Labour's Hauraki Waikato MP Nanaia Mahuta says the message to Māori voters is very simple.
We are eliminating the 2-for-1 message because in order to get us into government, you need to be able to vote for our party as well. And it's simply not true if those parties think that they're going to get a 2-for-1 exercise out in the Māori electorates. It's not true.
The 2-for-1 that Nanaia Mahuta refers to is part of the pitch that Mana's Hone Harawira used during previous election campaigns, where he argued if he gave the electorate vote to him that Kelvin Davis was high enough on Labour's list to get in anyway, so Te Tai Tokerau got 2 MPs instead of just 1. But Mr Davis says that pitch will not wash anymore. He was asked whether Mr Harawira would take the seat back off him come September's election.
Kim.com. People haven't forgotten that up there. He's got a lot to make up. I'm confident that I'll turn him over. I'll stand my record in the last 2.5 years against anything from the previous 9 years. So, bring it on.
Andrew Little says there is a whole group of fresh Māori talent coming through the Labour ranks, and he name-dropped Tamati Coffey, Kiritapu Allen and Paul Eagle. The Māori Party co-leader Marama Fox says Labour's announcement is astounding.
I thought there could be no other depths to the way that they would treat their Māori MPs. This is a further indication that Andrew Little doesn't quite get it. He demoted Nanaia, he jumped over the whole of them with Willie Jackson, he asked Penny Henare to stand down. I'm like, Andrew Little, when are you going to wake up and understand you can't keep doing this to your Māori MPs?
Mrs Fox's fellow co-leader, Tiururoa Flavel, says through this term of government, the Māori Party has had just 1 electorate and 1 list MP, but Labour has had 6 electorate MPs with little to show for it.
What have they been able to show for that effort or those seats? Nothing. There's the difference, the ability to be able to work with the government to secure gains for your people. No good being in opposition because you get nothing. At the end of the day, you must be working cooperatively with whoever it might be at the table to get those gains, and that's what we've done.
Labour will decide on its list at the end of next month. Atu i te whare pārimata mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Chris Bramwell-Aho.
The lawyer representing an American heart surgeon who caused a fatal 3-car crash near Nelson says his client is horrified by the carnage he caused. 2 men died and several others were injured in the crash, including the driver's wife, which happened on the coastal highway outside Mapua almost a month ago now. Kenneth Wolnack appeared in the Nelson District Court today where he pleaded guilty to a total of 6 careless driving charges. His lawyer Tony Bamford told our Nelson reporter Tracy Neal that Mr Wolnack is struggling with the aftermath of the accident which occurred during a much looked forward to holiday.
Mr Bamford says it's a tragic set of circumstances for all concerned, including Mr Wolnack, a doctor who has spent a career saving lives.
It's something that is so foreign to him because he spends most of his time saving lives, and he's now having to come to terms with having caused this horrible accident and the consequences that have flowed from it.
Kenneth Wolnack, a 63-year-old cardiothoracic surgeon from Wisconsin, and his wife were on holiday in New Zealand. They had just left their accommodation in Mapua when Mr Wolnack made the fatal decision to do a U-turn on the highway into the path of an oncoming truck carrying tons of scaffolding. The impact threw the truck into the path of an oncoming 4-wheel drive towing a caravan. A 41-year-old father of 2, Stephen Jays from Nelson, who was in the truck, and a 69-year-old Christchurch man, Kevin Whitburn, who was driving the 4-wheel drive, were killed. Mr Bamford said Mr Wolnack knows that nothing he can say will change what's happened.
His words, he understands, really can't change anything. He wishes they could, but he will just have to go through the process and hope that the families can come to terms and move on from this in some way.
Wolnack appeared pale and exhausted as he relived events in court today. Mr Bamford said Mr Wolnack had no family in New Zealand and his wife had only just been discharged from Wellington Hospital. Only members of the victims' families were in court.
We've had some direct communications from them. They're immensely supportive and forgiving, which is wonderful really for him, and perhaps surprising in some respects. But his wife remains in Wellington. She has just been discharged, and he obviously also needs to support her.
Judge Bruce Davidson remanded Wolnack on bail for emotional harm and reparation reports and restorative justice. He said home detention or community detention also had to be considered. The court heard that Wolnak could not recall events of the morning of the accident, and Mr Bamford said he accepted he might be in New Zealand for a time yet. He said despite the struggle faced by Mr Wolnak, facing the families was one way forward.
He is hoping to gain something positive out of a restorative justice process, which we have just started. And I think all who will participate hope to get something positive out of it.
Wolnak will be sentenced next month. In Nelson, Tracy Neal.
It's 15 minutes, 5:15. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Huge crowd has gathered at Unity Books on Willis Street in Wellington. We will be live there once we know when the book is out, what's it about, and we will talk to its author once the official part of the launch is over. But before then, John Key will accept the $51,000 a year annuity paid to former Prime Ministers and says the entitlement is not particularly generous compared with what overseas leaders get paid. The former PM is bowing out of political life tomorrow when he'll give his final speech in Parliament. And on the eve of that farewell, he spoke to our political editor, Jane Patterson, who began by asking him about Bill English's decision to raise the pension age, a decision Mr Key says he backs, despite refusing to do so while he was PM.
It's 20 years out into the future, so it's a long way away. And I wasn't surprised. I wasn't surprised by the steps that they took, and I just have enormous faith in Bill and Stephen as the finance team to be balancing off the different competing objectives. I mean, it was right for me when I was there, and even Bill wasn't proposing to raise it for 20 years, so it's not exactly like it's changing dramatically overnight. But probably it's sensible, I think, to give people an indication of later on down the track that it's going to go up.
Did you take any implied criticism from his move so quickly to address superannuation?
No, I think you have to do some things that are a little bit different. I mean, so as I said, you need continuity, but you need change. And if everything's just exactly the same, then I think people go, well, what was the change all about? And Bill's always going to be a bit different from me, and that's actually a really positive thing, because I kind of think, to me, it's like, to give you a kind of golf analogy, we're all playing the same game, but we play it with a slightly different style, a slightly different swing, and that's what politics is like. He's the Prime Minister of a National League government, and I was too, but it's always going to be a little bit different. And we've happily cohabitated with quite different views on lots of things over the years, particularly probably in social areas more than economically. We've been very much joined at the hip. But there's a space for all of that in an MMP environment, in the MMP Parliament.
So what will you do with the Prime Minister's annuity that you get, the $51,000 a year?
I don't know really. I'm going to take it. I'm not taking anything else. I never have really taken the cars and all those different things. Look, inevitably, I'll either have some expenses or I'll make some donations and things over time, but I don't have a set plan for it at the moment.
Do you think Prime Ministers and Governors General and other dignitaries should continue to get these payments into the future once their term has finished?
I don't say this purely as a matter of self-interest, but I think there's actually an argument that we're not that generous. So if you look around the world, John Howard has an office, he has staff, he still to this day has a driver and some sort of protection. That's true in Canada, it's actually true everywhere else. Now, it's obviously going to be different in a smaller country somewhere, but in a place like New Zealand, which is a first world developed economy, one of the issues is it's different for Helen Clark because she's gone off to the UN, she's got a whole infrastructure around her. But I'm now in a position where I don't have infrastructure. I'm going to have even less as of tomorrow, and that's okay. Except I am going to have to hire someone because there's just so many people that want to email me or talk to me or make appointments or whatever it might be. So, look, there'll always be some people who say, these guys don't deserve anything, but the truth is that, if you came into politics for the money, you're really coming in for the wrong reasons, and I don't think many politicians do.
What are your plans now?
This year's going to be reasonably quiet-ish. It's probably not what Rona would say right at the moment. She's so busy than she thought it would be, but the reality is that I'll do some international speeches. I'm doing a few bits and pieces, but I'm going to go on a few boards, and what I've been doing so far is just sitting down with everyone that wants to talk to me, and there's been both internationally and locally, and at some point I'm going to distill that down, but I'm probably not going to start on any board until at least the end of this year.
One of the questions I get asked the most is, why did John Key really leave?
I know. Yeah, I had
Anything
to,
else
I had
you
to
want to
shatter
share?
everyone's illusion. I know. I'm sure Nikki Hagel will have a view on that tonight. But no, look, there is no scandals. I mean, I think I often say to people, well, look, what's unusual about it is that no one does it. No, it was a really hard call. I mean, I really sat there for about a year thinking long and hard, and sometimes I'd say, yep, no, I'm definitely going to do it. And then 2 weeks later, I'd think, maybe I shouldn't do this. And I could have only done it if National's numbers were high, my numbers were high, and it didn't look like I was, a hospital past the bill. But I kind of felt, a decade as the leader was about right. And I'd done everything. I'd been everywhere from Security Council to every APEC you can imagine. And I just sort of felt, I don't know whether it's just going to look like I'm sort of hanging on because I want the job rather than I feel like I can, make a difference now.
What are you most proud of as Prime Minister?
Two things, I think, really. One was the economic performance. I think you can get into an individual particular policy, but ultimately, I reckon most people want to be independent of the state. They want to provide for their own family, they want security, and they want to feel as though they've got a confidence about their family. And a strong economy lets them do that. It lets them get overtime or get a job or whatever it might be. So for us, I think the economic performances over the last decade were really important. I think the other thing was that we really got it right when it came to Christchurch. I think you can always look at individual things, but overall, there's a reason Christchurch has voted National so strongly post the election. I think there's just a general understanding on the ground there that while not everything is perfect, overall we did a pretty darn good job. I think we were quite good at responding to those natural disasters, whether they were Kaikoura or a Pike River mine disaster.
That's John Key, who is making his final speech to Parliament tomorrow, talking to our political editor, Jane Patterson. Checkpoint on RNZ. Coming up, Nikki Hager's book. We have just been hand-delivered a copy. I'm holding it up to the screen. If you're watching us on Facebook, Freeview 50, or live streaming on YouTube or the RNZ website, it is called Hit and Run. It is co-authored by Nikki Hager and John Stevenson. Underneath the main title, it says The New Zealand SAS in Afghanistan and the Meaning of Honour, and the back says, in August 2010, a New Zealand soldier died in a roadside bomb blast in Afghanistan. In retaliation, the New Zealand SAS led a raid on 2 isolated villages in search of the fighters they suspected were responsible. They all knew the rules. Prior to firing weapons, their freshly issued orders said the commander approving the strike must determine that no civilians are present, end quote. If they could not assess whether civilians were present, firing was prohibited, but it all went horribly wrong. None of the fighters were found, but by the end of the raid, 21 civilians were dead or wounded. Most were children or women, including a 3-year-old girl who was killed. A dozen houses had been burnt or blown up. The operation was personally approved by the Prime Minister via phone from New Zealand. More missions against the group of fighters and more potential crimes of war followed, including the beating and torture of a prisoner. Afterwards, no one took responsibility. The New Zealand military denied the facts and went to great lengths to cover things up. Now, we should say we have just been handed a copy of the book. We did not have it prior to right now, and this is the first we have read of it. We are working to talk to its author and confirm the veracity of the allegations he is making, to find out more about the details inside, and we will do so over the next hour and 7 minutes. We will speak to the author shortly. Stay with us, and thank you for being with us. Also coming up on Checkpoint, a New Zealand mother describes the effects of a pregnancy test drug, Primidos. The FBI, James Comey, Russia and Donald Trump, and the recipients of the Prime Minister's Science Award, including an 18-year-old, a primary school teacher, and the world-renowned Dunedin study. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at CheckpointRNZ. And don't forget, of course, our email address is checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. A mother was asked to look at a photo of her dead child and give the 59 injuries he suffered, as she gave evidence at his murder trial, at a murder trial in the High Court in Christchurch today. Troy Taylor is in fact on trial at the High Court for assaulting and murdering Ihaka Stokes at home in 2015. His partner and Ihaka's mother, 21-year-old Michaela Stokes, was the first person to give evidence in the trial. Conan Young is covering the case for us. A short time ago, I asked him how Ms Stokes stood up to pretty rigorous questioning from the Defence Counsel.
Well, look, the defence lawyer, Phil Shammy, said that Michaela Stokes really relied on Troy Taylor to help care for Ihaka. She considered him a stepfather to the child, even though it wasn't his actual child. The defence lawyer said that she was young, she was only 19 at the time, she was heavily pregnant, and that this meant that she was subject to mood swings and that she was very tired. She was heard in court a lot about the text messages that she sent to Troy Taylor, asking for help on the day that Ihaka Stokes was found unconscious in his cot. She sent a text message to him earlier that day saying, "Look, I'm about to go insane, I really need you to get home." However, Michaela Stokes, under questioning, said, look, it might have been a hard day, but she was fine, she was coping. She said that when she lost patience that day, she just put Ihaka Stokes down and walked away. We also heard about the police interview that she gave just 3 hours after her son was declared dead that evening. And in this interview, I'll just read out what she said to the police when they asked her whether or not she had harmed her own son. And she said, "I don't know," and then it said that she laughed, and then said, "Not that I know of." That's in response to a question around did she harm her own son. She then, in the police interview, talked about her habit of sleepwalking, although she said in court today it wasn't something she'd actually done since she was a 10-year-old child. She said this to the police as a way to put them off the trail. She said at the time she didn't want her partner, Troy Taylor, to go down for killing her son, and she was trying to put them off the trail.
So that's Michaela Stokes, Ihaka's mum. Troy Taylor is the accused, and it's been revealed today he will be giving evidence in his own defence.
That's right, yes, and look, his lawyer today put it to Michaela Stokes that Troy Taylor would be taking the stand, and he would be saying that the night that Ihaka Stokes was found dead in his cot, that the little boy was really unwell, that he described him as being floppy that evening, and the defence lawyer says this is because it was Michaela Stokes that afternoon had actually harmed her own son. The lawyer also put it to her today that she had actually killed the boy. She said no, look, she'd never harm one of her own children.
There were some harrowing moments in court, I understand, Conan, when the 111 call Mr Taylor made was played to the jury.
This was one of the hardest things I think I've ever had to listen to in court, John. It was terrible. You could just hear the caller giving Troy Taylor advice on how to perform CPR on this child who was unresponsive. Michaela Stokes has talked about the child not breathing, but every 5 minutes or so gasping for breath, obviously just trying to struggle to stay alive. As this 111 call was being played, Michaela Stokes, who was in the dock, had her head in her hands. She was crying. Troy Taylor, he had his head in his hands, was crying as well. The jury were really struggling listening to this as well. It was obvious, and so as well as the 111 call, just as bad, we had some photos, or a photo, of Ihaka Stokes after he'd passed away, put up on a screen. This is the first time that Michaela Stokes had seen a photo of her boy after he'd passed away. She was asked to look at this and asked whether or not she had been responsible for any of the 59 injuries that he'd suffered. That included head injuries, his fractures to his shoulder blades, which it was said in court would require a lot of force to be used. So yeah, really tough in court today.
Conan Young, who was in court. To Washington now, where FBI Director James Comey has appeared before the House Intelligence Committee and confirmed for the first time that his bureau is indeed investigating the extent of any links between the Trump campaign and Russia, as Russia interfered in last year's presidential election. That there was interference is now widely accepted outside the Oval Office. That is, today Comey also slapped down those Twitter allegations from President Trump that his campaign headquarters were wiretapped on the orders of Barack Obama. That did not happen, full stop. With a wrap-up, here's the BBC's John Sopel.
Big questions for a big man. At 6'8", James Comey stands head and shoulders above all around him. So would he stick his neck out today at this hearing? Answer, yes.
The FBI, as part of our counterintelligence mission, is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. And that includes investigating the nature of any links between individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and whether there was any coordination between the campaign and Russia's efforts.
On the detail of the investigation into Russian collusion, James Comey wouldn't be drawn. But what about the president's claims that his predecessor, Barack Obama, had wiretapped Trump Tower? Here, he was more forthcoming.
With respect to the president's tweets about alleged wiretapping directed at him by the prior administration, I have no information that supports those tweets, and we have looked carefully inside the FBI.
So President Obama could not unilaterally order a wiretap of anyone?
No president could.
The president accused Mr. Obama and presumably the FBI of engaging in McCarthyism. Were you engaged in McCarthyism, Director Comey?
Try very hard not to engage in any isms of any kind, including McCarthyism.
Then Congressman Schiff turned to the director of the National Security Agency to answer questions about British involvement. Again, the responses were unequivocal.
Did you ever request that your counterparts in GCHQ should wiretap Mr. Trump on behalf of President Obama?
No, sir, nor would I. That would be expressly against the construct of the Five Eyes Agreement that's been in place for decades.
Our British allies have called the president's suggestion that they wiretapped him for Obama nonsense and utterly ridiculous. Would you agree?
Yes, sir.
Does it do damage to our relationship with one of our closest intelligence partners for the president to make a baseless claim that the British participated in a conspiracy against him?
I think it clearly frustrates a key ally of ours. I believe that the relationship is strong enough. This is something we'll be able to deal with.
Donald Trump didn't wait for the committee to start before tweeting his verdict. There's no evidence POTUS colluded with Russia. This story is fake news, and everyone knows it. And the real story that Congress, the FBI, and all others should be looking into is the leaking of classified information. Must find leaker now. And at the White House briefing, were they getting ready to hoist the white flag? Of course they weren't.
Is the president prepared to withdraw that accusation and apologize to the president?
No, we started a hearing. It's still ongoing.
And as for collusion with the Russians, what collusion?
There is no evidence, according to the people that have been briefed, of any collusion or activity that leads them to believe that exists.
The president's one public meeting today was with the Iraqi Prime Minister, and even Haider al-Abadi got in on the act, grabbing the president's arm at the end and saying, "We had nothing to do with the wiretapping." It's not recorded whether the president laughed at the joke.
That's the BBC's John Sopel from Washington. Coming up on Checkpoint, the OECD wades into the water debate. The journalist who broke the story of the pregnancy test drug Primados and its side effects, and a kilt, culottes, trousers, shorts, or even just their PE uniform. A Dunedin school lets its students choose regardless of their gender. Plus, this Nikki Hager book, Hit and Run, about the SAS in Afghanistan. But first, Katrina and the headlines.
Child, Youth and Family has had to do a U-turn in court after repeatedly reporting that a man had been jailed for sex abuse when he'd never been charged, prosecuted or jailed for such offending. The agency did not correct its reports to the family court till last year, despite being told 3 times over 15 years it was wrong. SIF has apologised to the man. The OECD wants a price on water in New Zealand to make sure it's used more efficiently. In a once-in-a-decade report, the OECD says the environment will be compromised if the economy continues to grow the way it is. The organisation's Environment Director, Simon Upton, says the OECD gave this advice 10 years ago and it's giving it again. The National MP, Todd Barclay, has refused to be interviewed by police investigating claims he had secretly recorded staff in his electorate office. Documents show a former long-serving staff member who'd worked in the electorate for 17 years told police she'd been informed Mr Barclay had recordings of private and personal calls from her office. Labour's 6 Māori seat MPs have opted to go off the party's list in a move that the Māori Party says is astounding. The Labour MPs contesting the Māori seats have been given a waiver to stand as electorate-only candidates. The Māori Party co-leader, Marama Fox, says the move is a further indication of how little respect Labour's leadership has for its Māori MPs. A world-famous Dunedin study that tracks the lives of 1,000 people has won top honours in the Prime Minister's Science Prize. The Dunedin Multidisciplinary Health and Development Study has followed and reported on the lives of people born in the city in the early 70s and has won $500,000. The road to Milford Sound has been closed after a collision between a car and a bus, after which both vehicles caught on fire. Several bus passengers have been treated for minor injuries. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
We'll have more on that Science Prize coming up. But first, business news with Nona Peltier. Retailer Kathmandu.
Yeah.
What's the news?
Well, they had a first half result which was in line with their expectations, even though they had flat sales. So what's the story there is basically that they closed down a few of their stores in the UK last year, and that impacted their sales growth. But they've been keeping quite a tight eye on their margins and costs. And they're looking at making a deal with a couple of retailers, one in Germany, one in the UK. And they still see some growth prospects ahead, and the market liked the result, so they gave the share price a tick up, 1.5%, 3 cents to $1.96.
Unlike Fletcher Building yesterday,
that's
Nona,
right.
by
That's
golly.
right. Although they did recover a bit today, Fletcher Building up 1% today, so the market's forgiven them a little bit.
Also, some numbers on people moving here and coming here as tourists, right?
That's right. We had the number of people coming here have continued to break records, not just visitors, but also people who are coming here to live. That's very strong numbers once again, and that was led by people on work visas, but also New Zealanders returning here. More people departed, but they were not New Zealanders. They were foreigners going home. So we'll see what happens with that. Now, where are we at?
The markets, what do they do
finally,
today?
the market, the top 50 index rose 0.4%. That's by 29 points to 7,086, and that's in line with what we've been seeing in Asia. The dollar is steady against a softer U.S. dollar, not surprising given all the news out of the U.S. We rose to 7.5 U.S. cents, 91.4 Australian, and 57 pence.
Nona Peltier, thank you very much indeed, Nona. The OECD has waded into the water debate, saying it's believed for the last decade that some form of pricing is needed in New Zealand to influence the way the resource is used, is needed. Charging for agricultural emissions, more scrutiny of irrigation and speeding up policy on biodiversity are also among recommendations from the organisation in its 10-yearly review. Here's Kate Gudsall with more.
Water quality is continuing to deteriorate, and the OECD says the government's goal to double primary industry exports between 2012 and 2025 potentially conflicts with freshwater management. The report's clear. New Zealand's environment will be compromised if the economy continues to grow the way it has been. The organisation's Environment Director, Simon Upton, says since the last review in 2007, he can see trajectories that aren't going in the right direction. He says the OECD's stance on water charging is consistent with its approach towards most scarce resources, and some form of charging is a good way of influencing its use.
It's not rocket science, and it's applied in many parts of the world, that if you want to be able to move water to be used by the most efficient user and the highest value user, then you need a more flexible system than one which simply hands out water for 35 years and the pattern is frozen.
Mr Upton says the OECD gave the same advice in its last environmental review 10 years ago.
Water is really precious. Water is at the bottom of agricultural production, and there is only so much of it in some regions. So when that's the case, you want to make sure it is being used in the most effective way. Now, an economic instrument is likely to find those uses more efficiently than some regulatory or bureaucratic mechanism.
The OECD recommends the government review its support for irrigation, saying 75% of the country's water was used for the practice and fresh water is scarce in some regions. It says nitrogen in waterways has increased in step with the growth in dairy herds, and water quality continues to decline in some regions due to agricultural and urban runoff. Federated Farmers National Vice President Anders Crowfoot says water pricing is very complicated and he doesn't think it necessarily sends the signals that people expect. He thinks in some instances pricing water will improve efficiency, but in others it will just increase farmers' costs.
In terms of putting a price on water, where do you start and stop? Do you charge the hydro? Do you charge for domestic water? That could get into quite a complicated discussion. And I think the way New Zealand has it at the moment, where you do pay for delivery of water, but you're not paying for the water itself, seems to be working reasonably well.
Unsurprisingly, Forest and Bird is not on the same page. It says the environment is in crisis and is being mismanaged. Its chief executive, Kevin Haig, says when the top international economic development agency says the same thing, the government must listen to reason.
It's a very, very timely thing for them to say with the current New Zealand debate. But clearly, if someone's going to make commercial gain from using fresh water, they ought to be paying for that privilege. And we can use that revenue to assist with the mammoth job of cleaning up our fresh water.
Simon Upton says the OECD's recommendations are just that, and countries don't have to listen to them. But Kevin Haig says there needs to be political consensus on important issues like the environment, especially water quality and usage, so whoever forms the next government can address them. For Checkpoint, ko Kate Gudsall tēnei.
The Prime Minister's Science Prizes have been announced this afternoon. The winners include what's known as the Dunedin Study, a world-renowned, decades-long longitudinal study into human development, the nature-nurture question and more. An 18-year-old who found a way to improve a famous old physics experiment. There's a primary school teacher, the first primary school teacher to be recognised in the teacher category, and a lecturer taking science to those who aren't interested in science. Our science reporter, Jacob McSweeney, has been out to meet them.
Professor Richie Poulton remembers interviewing subjects of the Dunedin Multidisciplinary Health and Development Study when he started working there during his university years.
I didn't think I was a kid. I thought I knew something then, but and now I'm 54 and they're all turning 45 this year. So we've all got to midlife. Well, not all of us, sadly. 38 have died, but there's 999 people still alive, and hopefully virtually all of those will participate in our next assessment, which begins in 2 weeks' time.
The Dunedin study started in 1972 and 73, following the lives of 1,037 babies born at Queen Mary Maternity Hospital in Dunedin. The data has led to changes to judicial practices thanks to the study's work on identifying antisocial behaviour and understanding later life effects of teenage cannabis use. Professor Poulton says he's looking forward to seeing some of the subjects' reaction to the award.
They start coming back for their assessment in a couple of weeks' time, and we'll run this assessment for about 20 months. Plan to have the statuette in the study members' reception area so they can enjoy it for the time they're here. They'll probably take selfies of themselves with it, and that's what you do these days.
The $500,000 prize money will fund new studies on hearing and vision, chronic kidney injuries and musculoskeletal research. Brendan Bradley is the winner of the McDermott Emerging Scientist Award. Within 2 years of finishing his PhD, he was in Christchurch for earthquakes there, and he also happened to be in Tokyo when the magnitude 9 Tohoku quake hit. His work has included using a supercomputer to calculate billions of data points in one day for video animation like this one, where waves of impact from the Kaikoura earthquake can be seen impacting the area around it. He says the same work would take up to 5 years on a standard laptop computer.
Some of the models that we've used to represent the South Island of New Zealand for looking at alpine fault earthquakes use about 25 billion points to describe the Earth's crust below the South Island. So that involves a huge number of computations, and really harnessing that high performance computing is key for us to be able to understand those sort of results.
Koro Nui School in the Hutt Valley will get $100,000 because of work by its science teacher Diane Christensen. the first primary school teacher to win this award. She's the curriculum leader for the subject at the school and has pupils beekeeping, making and selling natural creams, as well as cleaning up local waterways. Mrs. Christensen says it isn't crucial her students become scientists.
It's just as important to have kids grow up to be critical thinkers and to know to look for evidence and to look for data when there's all sorts of wild claims on the internet or in other places that they may look.
That's just the challenge facing our next winner. Rebecca Priestley is a science writer and is the winner of the Science Communication Prize. She's written several books and more than 200 articles on subjects like climate change and alternative energy. And she's clear about one major challenge facing sciences right now.
We've got a real challenge in how to reach people who perhaps, don't profess to have an interest in science, or people who don't accept that the climate is changing. And when you look at what's happened in the United States, where they've elected a blatant climate change denier, there's a massive challenge ahead.
The Future Scientist Prize went to former Onslow College student Catherine Pott. She cracked a loophole in the Van der Poel method, which measures the electrical conductivity in a sample. Miss Pott developed a technique using simulation on a computer to correct measurements, where a sample has a hole in and readings are distorted because the current flows through the hole. For Checkpoint, Core Jacob McSweeney, Tēnei.
5:45, the Ministry of Social Development has apologised after Child, Youth and Family wrongly told the Family Court for years that a man had been convicted and jailed for sex abuse. The man told the Privacy Commissioner his son, family and wider community believed the false information, and he's been assaulted and his house attacked. The news comes on the same day that the government ordered a full review of SIF's handling of another case involving a Wellington preschooler. In that case, a Family Court judge criticised the agency for putting the 3-year-old girl at unacceptable risk by providing misleading information about her father. That father is now suing SIF. Here's our political reporter, Demelza Leslie.
The 3-year-old had been living with her mother, who was taking drugs and in an abusive relationship with a violent boyfriend. He is facing charges of raping and assaulting the mother. But SIF repeatedly and wrongly told the court it was the girl's father who was violent, and that added a 5-month delay to the man getting the care of his daughter. After RNZ News broke the story this morning, the Social Development Minister, Anne Tolley, ordered the agency's chief social worker to review the case.
I've called for a full review and I want to see the outcome of that review, both myself and to the Associate Minister.
What do you think were SIF's biggest failings?
Oh, look, I'm going to leave that for the review, but it is really disturbing when they gave me advice consistently, and I'm a bit cross about that.
The father says he told SIF 13 times over 3 years he was worried about his daughter's safety. The agency's own documents show social workers dismissed his concerns, saying he appeared to be acting maliciously and would be considered abusive if he didn't stop. The father, who we can't identify, says he's been living in a nightmare.
Over the last 3 years, it's been absolute hell. SIF's had made it very difficult to actually be able to protect my daughter. I think they pick a person and run with the person they like, and decided to completely go against me. If they actually listened in the first place and investigated and did their job in the first instance, it certainly wouldn't have taken 3.5 years of battling SIFs and involving outside agencies to actually have information corrected and to have my daughter protected.
His lawyer, Chris Nichols, says the agency is quick to jump to conclusions without checking its facts.
The particular circumstances are isolated, but there is a systemic issue here. The systemic issue is that of tunnel vision. In this particular case that I was involved in, the agency formed a very clear view, it seemed, very early on in the case, based on incorrect and incomplete information.
Child, Youth and Family has apologised to the family and the court for errors, omissions and not disclosing information. In a statement, it says in complex cases like this one, where parents are not working together, establishing the facts takes time and is not always successful. Anne Tolley acknowledges SIF deals with intensely complex issues, but says it needs to get its facts right.
I was assured on a number of occasions that a full investigation had taken place, but from what I can gather, it's the same people and having a look at what they've done and saying, yep, we've done it all okay. The decisions we made were right. Now, that's not really a full review, and that's not getting an independent oversight.
The Minister says the outcome of the review will be considered alongside work that is looking at creating an independent authority to investigate complaints and failures by Child, Youth and Family. Labour's children's spokesperson Jacinda Ardern says that authority should be set up already.
I think whenever an agency has powers that are as significant as the ability to remove children, we need to have proper oversight. Howard Broad did a review of the complaint mechanisms 4 years ago now, and still we've seen very little change to the way that they operate.
From Parliament for Checkpoint, Demelza Leslie.
We turn now to the drug Primodos and its alleged relationship to birth abnormalities and even miscarriages and stillbirths. As covered last night on Checkpoint, the drug was prescribed in New Zealand in the late 60s and early 70s. MedSafe said yesterday it appears to have been available from 1966 and was removed from pharmacies in 75. Beyond that, conjecture. How many women took it, not known, but in Britain it was 1.5 million. Now, this is a pregnancy test using key ingredients at concentrations equivalent to 13 morning after pills. And both here and in the UK and Germany, it appears to have been given with little or no discussion of its ingredients or warning about the risk. Documentation is scant, perhaps because, as with the mother we spoke to earlier, it was sometimes given directly by a GP without a pharmacist or prescription being involved.
What I recollect is going in and telling him I thought I might be pregnant, and I think he gave me the pills. I don't remember going to the chemist to pick them up, and they were just in a little bottle, and he just told me to take these pills, and I don't even remember saying, well, you know, you'll get you. I don't remember him saying anything else, just take these pills and we'll see, is sort of basically what I remember.
Yes, it's interesting. We had a different relationship with our GPs when you and I were younger, didn't we? We just, you know, they told us to do things and we did them. So there was no declaration about risk, no discussion about risk, no discussion even really about how the drugs worked.
No. It's like you said, you know, it's like I just thought it, because this was my third pregnancy, and I know with the other two I'd had urine tests. But I didn't ask. I just thought I'll just do as I'm told.
What do you think about all of this now as you watch this story unfold, and the reporter who has broken the story has documents suggesting that the risk was as high as 1 in 5?
I think when I saw it, I just thought, gosh, you know, after thalidomide, because of course in my day, thalidomide was quite a big news item, and they thinking, you know, after the thalidomide, I'm sure that they would have been more careful what they gave to a pregnant woman. So I was surprised.
And so just to recap, the circumstances are you are in with your GP, you say, I think I might be pregnant. On the spot, your GP gives you these pills and says, here, take these.
Yes, and I don't know if he said you'll get your period if you're not, or just like take these and we'll see. It was basically what I remember, and you know, and I went home and took them. Yeah.
I'm curious because you said with your first two babies you had a urine test, right? Your first two pregnancies,
yeah.
Sorry. But so this third one, urine tests were clearly available. You'd had them previously. Have you any idea why you weren't offered a urine test again?
No, I guess I just accepted that this was a different way of doing it. It was a different doctor, of course. I was staying in Wellington with my mother. I was living in Wellington. I lived there for a short time. And it was a different doctor, so I just assumed that's what the different doctor did.
That was a woman, one of the women who took the drug in New Zealand. This afternoon, MedSafe said it was waiting on drug company Bayer to provide an indication of the volume of doses of Primodos distributed in the country. Bayer denies that Primodos was responsible for causing any deformities in children. After 6 o'clock, we're going to talk to the British journalist who broke the story. He'll be our guest after 6. He would have been our guest right now, except we're being joined live on the line by Nikki Hager. We do cross now live to Unity Books on Willow Street in Wellington. There, the investigative journalist Nikki Hager has just launched his latest book. I do have a copy. It's called Hit and Run, but I haven't read it. Are you there, Nikki?
Hi, John.
Hello, nice to talk to you. What is this about? It appears to be about the death of Tim Donnell, a New Zealand soldier there, and the SAS response. What can you tell us about what you were saying about that response?
Inside the military for the last several years, and that is that when Tim O'Donnell died, which is a tragedy, a hunt began for the insurgents who were believed to have launched the attack on his patrol, which was the military's business to do, the SAS's business to do. But it all went terribly wrong. And what they did, instead of getting the insurgents, they attacked two villages with no insurgents at all, no one associated with the Taliban, but a lot of women and children and old people who were there in the summer world.
Nikki, if you can hear me, we're going to hang up on you and we're going to redial. So what Nikki Hager is saying is, in the response to the death of a New Zealand soldier, the SAS launched a counter-offensive against the village, and I'm reading this off the back of the book, in which the fighters they suspected were responsible were from. But according to Nikki Hager, none of the fighters were found. By the end of the raid, 21 civilians were dead or wounded. Most were children or women, including a 3-year-old girl. So that's what we know so far. We're trying to get through on the phone there at Unity Books. Hundreds of people have turned out at the book launch, and I suspect people are tweeting up, Facebooking up, live viewing up, a free-for-all from there. So we're having trouble getting Nikki Hager out of there. I am going to keep reading from the back of the book. Nikki Hager says the operation was personally approved by the Prime Minister via phone from New Zealand. Now, obviously, we are trying to talk to the Prime Minister about this, or the former Prime Minister, John Campbell. We're also trying to talk to the Defence Minister at the time, Wayne Mapp. We're going back to Nikki Hager now. So, Nikki, the SA...
I'm terribly sorry, John. I talked to myself for ages here in the corridor.
That's all right. That's all right. So, the SAS launched a reprisal raid, a retaliation raid, a justice raid, whatever you want to call it. But the people responsible weren't there. Who were the casualties of that raid?
What happened was that in Afghanistan, if insurgents attack some people, they go and hide in the mountains for ages. They were far away. But in this town, there was these two little villages. There were the children of the town, their mothers, some of the old people, and all the injuries were those sort of people. And it was devastating. There were little children who were shot up. There was a young 3-year-old who died in her mother's arm with shrapnel inside her. There was a guy who was there, sort of the prize educated person of this little mountain village, who'd gone away and learned to be a teacher and was going to come back and work in his area. And he'd come home just after he graduated as a teacher to visit his family. He got shot up behind his house. It was been a huge catastrophe for these little towns. And instead of doing what you would expect New Zealand soldiers would do, the SAS did not go and give aid to the wounded, which is what their code of conduct tells them to do. They just shot through. And then they've tried to keep it secret and denied it ever since, including issuing public statements which say there were no civilians hurt and there were only insurgents killed, when in fact it was exactly no insurgents killed and all civilians. No insurgents hurt and all civilians killed. Yeah.
Look, we need to, I guess, be really careful around this, because we don't have your source material, we don't have your whistleblowers, we don't understand how you have proven this. But you are stating, and it's on the back of the book because that's all I've seen, that John Key was told in advance of the operation. Did he know how it went? Did Wayne Mapp, the Defence Minister at the time, know what happened?
This is an important question. What we know with absolute certainty, because we had people inside the SAS talking to us, John Key was rung the day before the raid from Kabul, just outside the door of the SAS command centre, operations centre, and briefed, and he gave the approval. He gave the green light for the raid. What we don't know, and we're very clear we don't know this, is what he was told later. And there are two possibilities.
Okay.
One possibility is that he was not told, which is in itself very bad, and the other is that he's misled the public about it.
Okay. Wayne Mapp, who was Defence Minister at the time, what do you know about his understanding of the raid and how wrong you are saying it went?
What we do know, what Wayne Mapp said at the time was he went on television when the rumours of this came out and said no civilians died. I assure you, I repeat, no civilians were died. But we know from people and sort of friends of his and associates of his that he's become less and less comfortable about what happened, and he actually called it a fiasco.
Are you calling this, and boy, it's difficult interviewing someone about a book you haven't read, and we have 50 seconds from now before the 6 o'clock news. Are you calling this a war crime?
No, we're not calling it a war crime, but we've been told under legal advice that we can say there are strong grounds to suspect that there were war crimes and there were certainly, almost certainly, serious breaches of international law.
Nikki Hager, who co-authored the book with John Stevenson, the book is called Hit and Run. It was released just after 5 o'clock tonight. Thank you for joining us. I'm sorry we didn't have longer with Nikki. He got caught in a stand-up at Unity Books. We were hoping to have a longer conversation with him. After 6, we're going to talk to our political editor, Jane Patterson, who has had the book for about 45 minutes now and has been reading it at high speed and will tell us what she makes of it. Stay with us. We'll also have that journalist who broke the Primidos story after 6.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. A book claiming that New Zealand Defence chiefs tried to cover up civilian casualties after an SAS raid in Afghanistan has been released today. Investigative journalists Nikki Hager and John Stevenson say New Zealand SAS and American troops killed or wounded 21 civilians, many of them women and children, during the raid in 2010. Mr Hager says the Defence Force and the government have never admitted or taken responsibility for what happened. The book, called Hit and Run, was released in Wellington today. The authors say it's based on numerous interviews with the people involved in the raids, including New Zealand and Afghan soldiers as well as villagers. The attacks were in retaliation for the death of Lieutenant Tim O'Donnell. Child, Youth and Family has had to do a U-turn in court after repeatedly reporting that a man had been jailed for sex abuse when he'd never been charged, prosecuted or jailed for such offending. The agency did not correct its reports to the Family Court till last year, despite being told 3 times over 15 years it was wrong. SIF has apologised to the man. He told the Privacy Commissioner that the family members, including his son and other members of his community, believed he was a sex offender and he'd been assaulted and his house attacked. The Privacy Commissioner has found the ministry interfered with the man's privacy and failed to take reasonable steps to check the accuracy of the information. It's now sent the case to the Director of Human Rights Proceedings. The former Prime Minister John Campbell says he hates to shatter everyone's illusions, but there's no scandal behind his decision to quit late last year. Mr Campbell gives his valedictory speech tomorrow, marking the end of 8 years in the Prime Minister's chair. In a wide-ranging interview with RNZ News, Mr Campbell says he leaves with no regrets.
I often say to people, well, look, what's unusual about it is that no one does it. And it was a really hard call. I mean, I really sat there for about a year thinking long and hard, and sometimes I'd say, yep, no, I'm definitely going to do it. And then 2 weeks later I'd think, maybe I shouldn't do this. And I could have only done it if National's numbers were high, my numbers were high, and it didn't look like I was a hospital past the bill.
John Campbell says he'll accept the payment for former Prime Ministers of $51,000 a year for the rest of his life, saying people who have served in such positions should get some financial support. Labour's 6 Māori seat MPs have opted to go off the party list. The Labour MPs contesting the Māori seats have been given a waiver by the party to stand as electorate-only candidates. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Labour's leader Andrew Little says the move is a direct challenge to the Māori Party, which has failed Māori while being shackled to the National Party for 9 years. He says Labour will offer Māori the strongest, most organised political voice of any party. Mr Little says there are lots of good Māori candidates coming through who will feature on Labour's list as the party tries to grow its Māori caucus. But the Māori Party co-leader Marama Fox says the move is astounding and a further indication of how little respect Labour's leadership has for its Māori MPs. Labour will decide on its list at the end of next month. Atu i te whare pāri mātou, ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
A visiting American surgeon who admitted careless driving that led to the death of 2 men and injured 4 other people has said through his lawyer there's nothing he could say that would alter the outcome. Appearing in the Nelson District Court, Kenneth Wolnak pleaded guilty to 2 charges of careless driving causing death and 4 of causing injury after the 3-car crash near Mapua last month. Tracy Neal reports.
The 63-year-old appeared pale and exhausted as he relived events in court today. He appeared alone with only members of the victims' families in court. His lawyer, Tony Bamford, said Wolnak's wife, who was badly hurt, had only just been discharged from Wellington Hospital. A 41-year-old Nelson father of 2, Stephen Jays, and a 69-year-old Christchurch man, Kevin Whitburn, died in the crash involving the Wolnak's car, a truck carrying scaffolding and a 4-wheel drive towing a caravan. Judge Bruce Davidson remanded Wolnak on bail for sentencing next month. In Nelson, Tracy Neal.
A world-famous Dunedin study that tracks the lives of 1,000 people has won top honours in the Prime Minister's Science Prize. The Dunedin Multidisciplinary Health and Development Study has followed and reported on the lives of people born in the city in 1972 and 73. It will get $500,000 in prize money. It's 6:05. To sport, and the troubled Warriors playmaker Kieran Foran may finally make his National Rugby League debut for the club. The 5'8" has been named on the bench for this weekend's game against the Dragons, with the Warriors desperately needing a lift after their loss to the Canterbury Bulldogs in Dunedin last week. Here's our Rugby League reporter Matt Chatterton.
It's almost a year since Foran played a rugby league match. He suffered a season-ending shoulder injury in May last year when playing for his former club, the Parramatta Eels. After that, his personal life spiralled out of control and was ordered by the NRL to undergo psychological tests before they would allow him to be registered. Foran has been included in the extended squad for the match and may not yet be included in the team when the final 17 is named just before kick-off. However, the Warriors have confirmed skipper Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, who missed last week's match due to concussion, will play against the Dragons. This is Matt Chatterton.
The All Black and Crusaders back Israel Dagg has had surgery on his injured knee and is expected to be sidelined for another 6 weeks. He's posted a photo on social media saying the operation went well. Meanwhile, the Blues utility back Piers Francis is returning to Britain. The 26-year-old, who was born in England, has signed to play for Northampton and will leave at the end of the Super Rugby season. The jersey worn by New England's Patriots quarterback Tom Brady in last month's Super Bowl has been recovered after apparently being stolen. It was found in possession of an accredited member of the international media in Mexico after an investigation involving the FBI. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights.
So then she absolutely insisted that I try on this certain dress. She said, "Madam, this dress is so sexy it'll give your husband ideas." I said, "Why? Does a brain come with it?"
Phyllis Diller had at least 53,000 gags typed out on individual 3x5 cards, and volunteers at the Smithsonian are transcribing them into digital copies. Tonight on Nights, 53,000 jokes from Phyllis Diller, plus Damien Fenton on the wherewithal of war, and a World of Music feature after 11. Tonight on Nights, after the news at 7, RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Waikato, cloudy periods. Waitomo, Coromandel Bay of Plenty and Taupo, fine but cloudy periods tomorrow. Taranaki to Wellington, including Taumarunui and Taihape, mainly fine but low cloud and occasional drizzle developing tonight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine but cloud increasing tomorrow evening with some drizzle in Hawke's Bay. Wairarapa, fine but becoming cloudy overnight, cloudy and some patchy drizzle tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, excluding the Kaikoura Coast, mainly fine but isolated showers about the ranges. The Kaikoura Coast and Canterbury, cloudy with patchy drizzle. Otago and Southland, often cloudy with a few showers tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, rain or drizzle spreading north, clearing in Westland this evening and elsewhere tomorrow morning. Fiordland, cloudy periods with 1 or 2 showers in the south, and the Chatham Islands, a few showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Investigative journalist Nicky Hager has just unveiled his latest book, in the last hour. And this one is about a raid by the New Zealand SAS in Afghanistan that he says was personally approved by the Prime Minister. We don't know, though, and Nikki Hager doesn't know what the Prime Minister learned after the raid. Mr Hager says the 2010 raid, which was in retaliation for the death of a New Zealand soldier, led to 21 casualties. The book is called Hit and Run, the New Zealand SAS in Afghanistan and the Meaning of Honour. Here's what Nikki Hager told us just before the news.
What Wayne Mapp said at the time was he went on television when the rumours of this came out and said no civilians died. I assure you, I repeat, no civilians were died. But we know from people and sort of friends of his and associates of his that he's become less and less comfortable about what happened, and he actually called it a fiasco.
Are you calling this a war crime?
No, we're not calling it a war crime, but we've been told under legal advice that we can say there are strong grounds to suspect that there were war crimes and there were almost certainly serious breaches of international law.
All of this is just breaking. Amnesty International have just issued a statement saying, based on the release of Hit and Run, the New Zealand SAS in Afghanistan, etc., there appears to be evidence that New Zealand troops may have been involved in a raid in Afghanistan that violated international law and resulted in civilian deaths, including a 3-year-old girl. That statement just out from Amnesty International. We're going to go to our political editor, Jane Patterson, who's been at the book launch at Unity Books. Jane, are you there?
I am, and I'm sorry, you'll have to excuse the noise. I'm just outside on a busy Wellington street, so if you can hear me okay.
Yes, and this is how Nikki Hager book launches happen, right? Late in the afternoon, he's had 7 books. 6 of them have been released in election year, probably most famously Dirty Politics and Seeds of Distrust, which was, of course, the Corngate book. What do you make of this book? What is it telling us, Jane?
Look, on the face of what Nikki Hager and John Stevenson have outlined, this is a very serious allegation. Now, we asked them what evidence they had to make these allegations, and it's based on some documentary evidence in terms of a kill list that apparently the SAS had for some of those insurgents. But the main information in terms of that raid in 2010 has come from sources. Now, they say they are anonymous sources, which of course makes it very difficult in terms of corroborating that information. But they say more than 36 people provided information from the book.
Bugger, I think, is a fair description of our response to Jane dropping out there. We'll try her again. That's what happened to Nikki Hager before, when he was talking to us just before 6. The same fish in a goldfish bowl kind of noise coming through the phone. Pip, our EP, is just calling Jane back. So what we think the book is saying, and obviously I haven't been able to read it. I've only had it for about an hour. What we think the book is saying is that the raid on the village was in response to the death of a New Zealand soldier or soldiers who weren't part of the SAS. It appears the SAS obtained permission to go into the village or villages. Nikki Hager says the Prime Minister and the Defence Minister knew they were going in. They were looking for insurgents who weren't there. There were civilian casualties. Whether or not John Key and Wayne Mapp knew about the civilian casualties is not known. Wayne Mapp seems to have publicly denied after the fact that there were civilian casualties, but he may not have known otherwise. We're hoping to get through to Jane. We don't have her. Once again, I think the phone line out of Unity Books on Willis Street, and anyone who knows that little bookshop will know that it is crowded in there on Nikki Hager book launch day. Jane is not there. Jane, are you there? Jane, are you there? No, we've lost her. The modern world, eh? So that's what we know about the book so far. The allegations, in short, are that the SAS went after insurgents and didn't find insurgents, but did find civilians, and that there were civilian casualties, including civilian deaths, and that they have been covered over. We will go back to the story if we can obtain Jane. But we're moving around a lot tonight because there's lots of breaking news and lots of crappy phone lines. Earlier in the program, we heard from a New Zealand mother who was prescribed the pregnancy test drug, Primodos, when she fell pregnant with her 3rd child. In 1972, the mother told us she was prescribed the drug by her GP. The journalist who broke the story of Primodos and its side effects is Jason Farrell of Sky News in Britain. His work has revealed the probable extent of the drug's impact, and also that information was withheld about the cause and effect relationship between the drug and birth abnormalities. In other words, women kept being given the drug after serious concerns had been raised. And Jason Farrell has seen material stating the risk to women taking it was possibly as high as 1 in 5.
I think the fact that the British regulator had come up with this report in 1975 saying that there was this 1 in 5 risk, and then had warned the company first that the figure had never been made public, and that just seemed extraordinary. And then we found out that he later said that he'd destroyed all the materials that he based his evidence on. It didn't look good.
1 in 5.
It's bad. Yeah, I mean, in medically, if you think about risk in medicine, I mean, even 1 in 100 is not a good risk level. So 1 in 5. And I think part of the problem was that a lot of the research had been done into malformations in the past. You look at a specific thing, like you look at spina bifida, you look at spinal problems, or you look at cleft palate, or you look at limb defects. But to just look and say in general, there's a 1 in 5 risk with this drug. You put them all together, then suddenly you realize that this drug could cause a range of deformities. And I think that's why it took a while for people to realize it, because it wasn't like a syndrome, like with thalidomide, where it was always short limbs. Could be heart defects, and they don't necessarily get picked up on straight away as well. So we have victims here who've had children with heart problems who've died very young. So it's a really, really tragic drug, because it's been hit. If as we suspect, it is linked to these malformations, it's something that's been hidden for an awful long time.
The risk of 1 in 5 was identified in 1975, and an interesting thing happened. It was taken off the shelves in New Zealand in 1975. Well, shelves being a relative term, it was prescribed. You couldn't buy it. You had to get it through your doctor. But it remained available in the UK and, in fact, other parts of Europe until 1978. Why?
Well, I think that it had a second use. So it was used as to regulate periods. And I think that was one reason. I think also from the documents we've looked at, when they saw this 1 in 5 risk, the reaction of one scientist in the UK was, we need to remove this drug from the market urgently. It's exactly what he said. And he got a letter back from the sales department saying, no, that would be a concession if we remove it from the market in the UK, or if we put a warning on the packet, then that will damage sales elsewhere. And there was this sort of feeling that they just didn't want to do that, and they certainly wouldn't do it unless the regulator told them to. Now in the UK, they just said, well, we're going to put this warning on the packet, and they send a letter out to doctors to say, don't give it to people if they're pregnant. But of course, this drug was at this stage mostly being used as a pregnancy test. So the thing they should have done, it seems to me, is just remove it from the market completely. Because if they didn't do that, there was still a risk that it was going to be handed out as a pregnancy test, and it still was. And there's a report we're putting out tonight, which during the day where you are, but tonight we're putting out a piece which talks about the fact that this drug was used as an abortive in certain parts of the country, in certain parts of the world. So in South Korea, we've got documents that say that this drug, although it was used as a pregnancy test in the UK, in South Korea, women would take maybe a double dose of it, but it was enough to cause an abortion. And, is that the kind of drug you would give to a pregnant woman? Now, we've put that to the drugs company, and there's not been a response on that particular issue.
And so, sorry to interrupt, but this is extraordinary. So, depending on what constituency you're in, it was being sold for completely, or distributed for completely different purposes. In the UK, it was a pregnancy test. In South Korea, it induced abortions, terminations. And was the drug company aware of its use in South Korea?
That's what we're about to reveal. The document I see was dated 1978. So they're aware of it then. I can't tell if they were aware of it before then, but there was also another document that suggested that they were surprised to learn from doctors in Germany just how commonly it was being used as an abortive as well. This is stuff that I'm telling you that's just about to go into the reports that we're doing today on it. There's a lot more in this documentary still to come, as it were. We've only revealed part of the jigsaw that we've been putting together over the last year or so, and we're really shocked by that fact. But that is there in the documents. It does suggest that it actually says women who worked in the entertainment industry in South Korea used this drug as an abortive.
That is Jason Farrell, the Sky News reporter who has broken the story. Extraordinary. A pregnancy test and an abortive simultaneously in different countries. Let's go back to our political editor, Jane Patterson, whose phone wasn't very good before, so we've given her a tin and a piece of string. Old school styles, Jane, are you there?
Yes, cell phones have not been our friend today.
No.
It's okay.
No, but look, you're there. And better late than never. Right, where were we? So you were assessing, I guess, it's hard to assess the veracity of this book because Nicky Hager relies on whistleblowers and he never tells us who they are. Of course, he shouldn't. And he does lots and lots of interviews with people. But if it is true, then what are we to make of it?
This is a very serious allegation if this is correct. And what this information is based on is 3 dozen people providing source material to Nicky Hager and John Stevenson. Now, the book says that 20 of them are from the New Zealand military and Afghan security forces, but they will remain anonymous. So even though the authors say that they have been cross-checked and they are satisfied that they're genuine, it's very difficult to corroborate this independently. The book does have other documentary evidence like a kill list and other sourced military material, but I must say too, I've had the book for probably about half an hour, so I have not read it thoroughly as a disclaimer, but on the face of it, these allegations are serious and it'll be up to the government now to respond because that's the source of information in terms of whether this happened or not.
Okay. The interesting thing is, of course, that Nicky Hager told us prior to the news that both the Prime Minister and the Defence Minister were briefed that some kind of retaliatory raid or hunt for the perpetrators in this village was going to take place by the SAS, and they may have received that information in the best faith and heard nothing since. We don't know what they were told after the raid. So is this a defence story or a politics story or both? Or is it too soon to say, Jane?
It is both. The New Zealand Defence Force ran the operation. The Chief of Defence Force, according to Nicky Hager, was present when that permission was sought, as was the Defence Minister. They were unsure, again, according to what Nicky Hager and John Stevenson have said, and rang the Prime Minister. Now, the only publicity really around it, there was a bit of a flurry of publicity on the 29th of August, so about a week after the raid, and ISAF, the international coalition that ran the operation in Afghanistan, put out a media release, and this is in the book, talking about the raid on this village and saying that there could have been possible civilian life or injury as coalition helicopter rounds fell short, missing the intended target. So they held open the possibility of civilian casualties at that point. However, after an investigation in 2011, the New Zealand Defence Force put out a media release absolutely denying that it happened. They said 9 insurgents were killed in the operation. Following the operation, allegations were made. They were investigated and they found that they were unfounded. So this had certainly come to the attention of the Defence Force and I'm sure the Minister at the time that there were at least allegations of civilian casualty.
Right, Jane, sorry, we're running out of time, but that's very important. So the Defence Force said at the time insurgents were killed. Nicky Hager is saying no insurgents were even there. Is that the difference in the two stories?
That's right. So
Okay.
Nicky Hager said that there had been rumours popping up in New Zealand, and in quite an unusual move, the Defence Force released the statement to deny allegations of civilian casualties, saying insurgents were killed in the raid, that the New Zealand Defence Force was involved. In fact, they do say Special Operations Forces, so they are putting the SAS there at that raid at that time. but say there were no civilian casualties.
Jane Patterson, our political editor, who's been doing some powerful speed reading. Thank you so much, Jane. This book came out just after 5 o'clock, 23 past 6. Some Auckland Library staff fear they could be forced to travel large distances to work at other branches under restructuring plans proposed by the Auckland Council. It wants permanent full-time staff to rotate around libraries within their local board area to cover staff who are sick or taking annual leave, but some employees could be forced to travel much wider distances. Here's Anusha Bradley.
The Fit for the Future overhaul of Auckland libraries has already seen 74 staff take voluntary redundancy. The Auckland Council is proposing casual jobs at community libraries be replaced by the newly created role of network library assistants, who would float around a group of libraries, each covering about a quarter of the city. Staff say they've been told this could result in some assistants having to travel long distances within each cluster. Permanent full-time staff would be required to rotate within their local board area, with those in larger districts facing commutes of up to 30 kilometres between sites. The National Secretary of the Public Service Association, Glenn Barclay, says its members are particularly concerned about this.
Particularly those living in areas like Rodney and Franklin, because the lack of public transport between libraries, the transport costs and so forth, and the time involved could be substantial. So they're very concerned about that.
Library staff earning less than $40,000 a year can currently claim for travel costs, but all assistants employed for at least 2 years will get a pay rise this month, taking their salaries to $40,500, but they'll no longer be able to claim for travel. Auckland libraries declined to be interviewed or explain how the proposed staff rotation system would work. It says in a statement claims that staff would have to commute vast distances are categorically untrue, and it's having constructive talks with the union about the issue. Rodney Local Board Chairperson Beth Holbrook says the plans she's seen back this up.
For Rodney, we have 5 libraries: Wellsford, Warkworth, Mahurangi East, Kumeu and Helensville. And I do recall being shown some diagrams of clustering right across the Auckland region. However, the only libraries that were clustered in the presentation we were given were Warkworth and Mahurangi East. So I took that to understand that staff would only be shared between those 2 libraries, which are really only a 10 or 15 minute drive from each other.
Auckland Councillor Efeso Collins says he doesn't know the details of what's planned for South Auckland, but believes rotating staff would result in a poorer service.
We're not talking about mobile bank managers here who run off in different places. We're talking about people who actually walk alongside and hold people's hands. And I'm thinking of libraries, particularly in South Auckland, like Tupu Library, Otara Library, Mangere East Library, where we've got a real passionate commitment to young people. And if you're going to be throwing staff around everywhere, you're going to lose the ability of those staff to really hone in and focus on the young people that they're getting through their libraries.
Auckland Libraries says the final restructuring plan will be revealed early next month, and it's expected the new model will kick in from July. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
Right, we're going to end tonight with a lovely story from out of Dunedin. Dunedin North Intermediate is embracing its student right to wear the uniform of their choice, regardless of their gender. It says students now have a choice of 5 options, and as long as they're tidy, that's all that matters. Otago Southern reporter Lydia Anderson paid them a visit.
A kilt, culottes, trousers, shorts, or even a PE uniform. Dunedin North Intermediate students can now choose whichever they prefer. The school has removed any rules that say boys or girls have to wear gendered uniforms. Principal Heidi Hayward says she's surprised it's become a talking point.
We're a bit bemused that people are interested in this, because really we've just said, OK, these are the uniform options. You make a choice. What do you feel comfortable in? As long as you wear one uniform in its entirety, we're really happy with that, and, knock yourselves out.
Year 8 student Bonnie Leachman was instrumental in bringing about the change. She asked Ms Hayward if girls had to wear skirts, and her principal realised there was no good reason for it. Bonnie says she got a few odd reactions when she started wearing shorts.
I had lots of comments saying, is that a boy or a girl? Oh my god, it's a boy. No. And I usually just say to people, I'm a girl, but I don't like kilts or skirts.
But Bonnie doesn't care. She plans to keep on challenging gendered uniform policies when she goes to high school. Year 7 student Casper Rennie Weston says it's nice to have choices if he feels like a change.
This is my first time ever having a uniform, and I was dreading it, like only wearing one thing. And then when I found out that I could actually have an option of uniform, it made me feel a bit more relaxed. I'm like, I can wear this or this.
He's enthusiastic about surprising his classmates with his uniform choices.
1 week I'd go culottes and the shorts for maybe a month, and then like next term break out with the skirt. It'll be like, oh, he's changing again.
However, Ms Hayward doesn't expect a lot of boys will decide to wear kilts or culottes anytime soon.
We're not necessarily expecting that there'll be that great onset of boys wearing skirts, but it still sends the message to them that it's not actually a problem to wear what you feel comfortable in.
She says the school chose to remove any gender specifications instead of bringing in a new gender-neutral uniform because that would have been expensive for parents who had already bought uniforms. She's hopeful the new uniform options will sit well with students who might be starting to question their sexuality or gender.
If they see that their school is accepting of difference, regardless of the fact that they might not be ready to be different, it's really an important message, I think, from us that we accept diversity.
The New Zealand Principals Federation and the Secondary Principals Association both say they haven't heard of other schools taking the same line as Dunedin North. They say it's up to each school community to decide what's right for them. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Lydia Anderson.
What a delightful story, what delightful kids featured in it. Thank you, Lydia. That's Checkpoint for this evening. Thank you for joining us on your radio, your television, online, Facebook. Whichever of the multitudinous options we offer, you chose to be with us today. We're delighted to have you with us. You can hear highlights in late edition at 10:15 this evening. They also have 9 to noon highlights, morning report highlights, the gamut. And our stories are, of course, on our website. On behalf of me, John Campbell, and our excellent Checkpoint team, should we have a shot of the control? Look at that team. Look at them. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A new book claims that New Zealand defence chiefs tried to cover up civilian casualties after an SAS raid in Afghanistan. Child, Youth and Family has apologised to a man after repeatedly reporting that he'd been jailed for sex abuse when he'd never been charged for such offending. The former Prime Minister John Campbell says it's no scandal behind his decision to quit late last year. And the police are still trying to work out who was in a car that went up in flames when it collided with a busload of tourists near Te Anau in Southland this afternoon. Our next news and weather is at 7. If you think RNZ has breached formal standards either on air or in our online content, you have the right to make a formal complaint. This must be made in writing to the broadcaster first, within 20 working days of the broadcast. To find out about those standards or to lodge a complaint, go to